bit of panel discussion here on cybersecurity and why it matters, because it's absolutely critical and important that we know and understand what's going on. Dally Security, we got Mark Davis, Jeremy Lawrence, and from Centaur, we got Mark Sangster. So, Mark, welcome to the party. Mr. Davis, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Russ. We're excited to be here. Appreciate you hosting, and I'll take just a couple minutes to kick it off here if that's good with you.
You bet.
So as Russ mentioned, my name is Mark Davis. I'm the president and CEO of Dally Security Systems. For those of y'all that aren't real familiar with Dally, we are a physical security integration company based in Houston, Texas. And our primary goal here every day is to do everything that we can for our clients to help keep their environments and their people safe. But as everybody knows, and as we continue to see daily, the threats to our clients, they just continue to evolve. And so we're not only facing the traditional physical security threats today, but those are evolving into additional digital threats, more commonly known as cybersecurity crimes. So I don't know if a lot of y'all know this, but there's a entire global community out there who is dedicated 7/24 to cybersecurity crime. They get up every day, go to work just like we do, and their sole goal that day is to see how many networks that they can hack into. And as we see more and more of this, it was important to Dally that we continue to evolve our services portfolio to meet today's needs of both the physical and digital security environments. And so we started to research our ability to provide these types of offerings. And when we evaluated companies, by far and away, Centaur rose to the top. And just like every new thing in the world today, there's instantly 100 or thousands even of companies that pop up being able to address those needs for you. And the thing that attracted us about Centaur is they've been around doing this since 2001. And they have risen to the top of their industry as a leader in managed detection and response to cybersecurity threats. And so it's an honor to us. We're definitely proud to be partnered with Centaur and able to offer their services and our portfolio to our clients. And so today we wanted to get out and evangelize that a little bit and talk about it. And so I'm pleased to introduce Mark Sangster, who's the VP of Industry Security Strategies at Centaur. And for y'all that don't know Mark, he is an evangelist, a speaker, an author, and pretty much a renowned global authority on cybersecurity crime and the solutions designed to minimize and address those threats. So that's my 2 minutes, Mark. It's great to see you again. Good to have you here. And everybody, just please join me in welcoming Mark.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And it is a pleasure to be here and to have this conversation because, as you say, it's become so pivotal. You know, security really does span the spectrum from, the physical kind of issues that we have to deal with, restricted access and so on, right into the virtual version. And really the two blend. And, that's something that I kind of predict in the next year or so is that, we talk about cybercrime, but at some point it's just going to kind of become so pervasive and so ubiquitous that we just call it crime. If we think back years ago, we thought about white collar crime, for example, that notion of, all crime wasn't just, about physical assaults and stealing property or breaking into a building and stealing property, that this could be done with, a computer, with a ledger, right? It could be done out of the front office. And that's true. And eventually it just kind of gets normalized. And it's the same thing we see with crime on the cyber side. Now it's just that, I think because of the nature of it, because of some of the actors, and we'll talk about those today, it garners the headlines, right? And so before I sort of dive into that, I'll just give you a real quick overview of Centaur, and I'll certainly pick that up towards the end again. We're the authority in managed detection and response. As Mark said, we've been operating for about 20 years now, a little over 20 years now, in fact. And our job is on a 24/7 basis to look at the environment, to monitor the environment of our clients across all sorts of different industries and look for signs of suspicious activity. And when we see that suspicious activity, our job is to dive in investigate, and when we do deem that there's something malicious or potentially dangerous, our job is to contain it. So we're going to stop it in its tracks, and there's lots of ways to do that, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And the point of doing this is it's kind of like cleaning up spilled milk, right? If you catch these things quickly at the door and you can stop them, it's kind of no harm, no foul. However, if they go undetected in your environment for months and they kind of metastasize through your organization, that's where they cause real danger, right? Those are the ones that blow up later on, and where they've used ransomware to take down an entire organization, and now it's a headline issue, and the company's ground to a halt, and so on. And that's what we're here to effectively prevent from happening, right? Our job is to keep our 1,000+ clients out of the headlines. So let's take a quick look at some of the things that we're seeing when it comes to these trends. I mentioned the threat actors there, and ironically, regardless of where you're based, whether it's Houston, Texas, or it happens to be on the Eastern Seaboard or somewhere else in the world, the reality is your business may be targeted by state-sponsored actors, right? So these are people who are either funded by a government, work directly for that government, and their job is to steal information. It's to effectively destabilize trust, right? To sow a whole lot of confusion. And often they'll attack smaller firms because, frankly, they see you as very lucrative and softly defended targets. And so they know you're going to pay, and that's why they go after it. It's a bit like they're sort of funding their own business as they're pushing their ideological agenda. And in fact, we see uptakes in these types of attacks. They're kind of like the aftershocks of the major tectonic events that we see. So you have missile exchanges in the Middle East or trade war or whatever it might be that's going on. Like I just read about Australia and China this morning. We'll see kind of an uptick after that. And so it's almost like guerrilla warfare, kind of retaliatory activity, right? Well, we can't deal with you on the markets, so here's what we're going to do, right? We can hurt you where it counts. And there's organized criminals, and they're all kind of using newer tactics, right? We talk about, and of course in cybersecurity, there are so many acronyms, right? So much hyperbole, but I'm going to strip it down for a few points here. One of the things they do is they use hands-on keyboard attacks. And the reason I talk about that and why that's so important, this is not set and forget. This is not Skynet. This is not Terminators being deployed chasing Sarah Connor, right? This is an active game of espionage. So they have socially engineered you, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They know how to get into your environment. They are moving through your environment. They are creating persistent and consistent connections so they can come and go as they please undetected. And then they're looking for their end game, whether that's, as I said, a massive ransomware-based outage, or they've stolen all of your data or taken copies of it, and now they're selling it on the market, or they're publicizing it so they can extort you. And they use common market-based tools. So just like us, or even in Fortune 500 companies, right? We want to streamline our time to market. We want to increase the optimizations within our business and how we operate and the tools and technology we use. And we want to increase our revenue, right? And if we reduce our costs and we increase our revenue, that's profit. And they're doing the same thing on the criminal side. So they sell malware. It's called ransomware as a service, and you effectively lease it or you profit share. So, tell you what, I'm going to use your really clever kit that you've built, Mr. Criminal Gang, and we'll do a 60-40 split. Whatever money I steal, you get 60% of it, I'll take 40, and off I go. And they're also really good at what we call social engineering. And a lot of people have heard this term, that notion that information on your Facebook page and your LinkedIn and so on can be used to kind of profile you and look for ways to attract you, to get you to click or visit a website or download a file. And that's true, but that's kind of the simplistic, broad view of it. The more advanced techniques understand your industry, right? They understand what makes you tick. If you're a doctor, they realize that malpractice is not something you want to face. So they take malpractice lawsuits that are publicly available in court filing systems, and they change the names to protect the guilty. And then they send it to you and they make it look like you're being sued by somebody, and it's coming from a law firm that's prestigious and well known for malpractice suits. So you click on it and you open that complaint. And of course, as soon as you do that, they're off to the races. So it's not the simple, streaming service, online retailer telling you that your payment method has been declined and you should log into your account using the link provided in the email to update your credit card information. These are things that look like you. They look like your partners. They look like your clients. They look like various services that you might work with within your hospital or your law firm or your manufacturing facility or your bank, whatever it might be. So they're a lot trickier to spot. And when they do this, what we have to understand through this industrialization, right, as I said, they become more effective. So 50% of the attacks, in fact, it's really more than this, but these are the ones we can prove. They're all custom based. That means they've engineered your whole business. They understand, like I said, the industry you work in and your drivers and what keeps you up at night. And they've tailored their tools to go after you. And they're good at countering your defenses. So as I said, it's not a set and forget. I fired my missiles and off I go. I turn and run. This is very much a case of there is someone on the other end driving, right? This is, we talk about bad guys. Well, you need good guys on the other end because there are bad guys. It isn't some automated robot in the cloud. So I just want to quickly show you a couple of good examples here and make sure that I don't take too much time here. But when I talk about these ransomware gangs, these are two recent examples that we discovered. And one is a well-known ransomware gang called Sodninsky, and they have Our Evils, is actually the gang. And they go after those mid-sized market companies like I'm talking about, like you, right? They're going after manufacturers and insurance companies and law firms and architectural firms and so on. And now in this case, they look for extortion funds. When they didn't receive them, they then published the information, right? And you can imagine how potentially damaging that could be based on the nature of your business. And in another case, we found another group that has an odd name, Gootloader, who was actually used, and this is kind of genius, they took search results of what professionals would be searching for. So, new lawyers, new doctors, new architects, engineers, accountants, and so on. And they found a lot of them were trying to do basic things like, what tools do I do to set up my office? And how much square footage do I need? And how much should I be paying my administrative help? And, all that kind of stuff. And so they actually injected poisoned web pages into legitimate sites that contained stolen content. So things like resources, templates, tools, calculators, and things like that would just streamline your job. And of course, as soon as you did that, again, when you clicked on one, it looked like it was free, and you download that PDF or that Microsoft Office document, whatever it was, and they're off to the races. And again, that gives them the avenue that they need into your environment to deploy malware. Right. But it shows a cleverness, right? They understand, again, how you operate as a professional, and they set up tools that isn't, it's not based on Hulu or Netflix or, or Amazon or eBay. It really was specific to you. So it shows that kind of insider knowledge. And this is a good example of this one recently that we were just dealing with. And now this is all sort of faked up here. But one of the things we see in particular industries is there are risks inherent to the nature of what you do, right? And if we think about risk, there's risk you can avoid, right? You don't have to parachute out of an airplane if you don't want to. There's risks you can mitigate, perhaps flying on an airline with, more modern airplanes and a big sort of tier 1 airline that has a better safety record. And there's ones you just have to accept. If you're in the middle of the Atlantic and something goes wrong, well, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do about it at that point. And it's the same in cybersecurity. But in businesses, there's those things you just have to accept, right? You have to accept in healthcare, for example, that you have to have patient records in a digital capacity. And nowadays, you probably have patient wearable devices that are connected to your network as well. And those things can be attacked. If you're in law firms, you have to contain and protect all your client data. And in manufacturing, a lot of the factory floor is now automated and also interconnected, which gives another avenue for those criminals to get in. You can't turn that stuff off, right? You can't flatly refuse to keep patient records anymore and, memorize them. So that's a risk you just have to accept. And in this case, this was law firms that were targeted and some clients that were targeted by fairly smart people who found publicly available records. And they have to remain publicly available. That's the nature of the legal system, right? We need to know who was brought to court and what their charges were and what the evidence was and why the judge or the jury decided the way that they did. So they took that publicly available information, things we can't remove, and they used that to attempt to defraud them through fake invoicing. So it's clever. It's a very sort of sneaky way of doing it. But it, again, shows that they understand the business, they understand your business, and they know how to target you now. And they also know where it hurts. They know where you can't put up thicker, taller walls to protect yourself, right? They know these are the avenues or the channels that you have to keep open to do your job every day. And those are the ones they're going to exploit.
Mark, I want to ask a question because I know Dally has been very in tune with the physical environment. And, obviously these individuals are very patient. They're very consistent. They're very open to, waiting until the right opportunity opens up. And so as we understand and appreciate some of that stuff, some of the things that you're doing are helping business owners actually recognize when something's coming into the environment and producing that. Right. So I've seen actual, duplication of websites that look just like the website they were going to. And it's just really amazing what steps they'll take to get into your network. So it's fascinating that this is coming together, and the bridge between physical security and cybersecurity is becoming seamless. Like you said, it's just crime, period.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? Is there patience, and when they're looking for bigger kind of payoffs, right? When they're looking to deploy ransomware that locks down your entire system, and let's say a big manufacturer, and they know that's going to cause a significant and very costly outage, they can then demand a higher ransom. So just like us, right? In any other form of business, if I'm looking for a higher payoff, right, I'm willing to invest more, and that's not always money. That can be time and resources. And so they do the exact same thing, and they are very patient, and often they just skim information. So they got in, they stole some credentials as an example. Maybe they took a few files. Well, they don't know what to do with them right now. But then something changes, right? There's a macro event, or you bring in new clients, and that makes you more interesting. And suddenly they say, it's a bit like we saw this with companies where it's amazing in mergers and acquisitions, right? Nobody's interested in you until you're up for sale and someone's going to buy you. And as soon as somebody buys that company, they put a price tag on it. And it's amazing the number of people who come out of the woodwork with lawsuits, because suddenly it's like, you stole my intellectual property, or you've borrowed this from us, and you really copied that and we want to cut, because someone put a dollar figure on it. And it's the same thing in cybercrime. So they might have all this sort of stuff sitting around like they're hoarders or pack rats, and they don't quite know what to do with it. And then all of a sudden that company gets, now it's in an M&A deal with a large investor or an investment bank, and they go, aha, these guys have a lot of cash. Now they're worth going after. Now I'm going to take this stuff and threaten to expose it, because I know that might jeopardize that merger. I know that they're probably more willing to pay hush money at this point. I know they're under stress, all that kind of stuff. They're really, really good at playing, sort of the economic trade winds, but they're also really good at playing human emotions, right? Putting you in stress. That's why we see a lot of these attacks occur at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, or they occur, at the end of the day, right before a long weekend or a holiday, because they know we're all trying to get out of the office, even if it's virtual. And that's when people make those mistakes, or they circumvent security controls. They can't get a hold of somebody because it's a long weekend, and so they pay that invoice. And of course, it turns out on Monday, when everyone gets back to work and we're all sober, and we realize that that was a mistake, right? And it was fraud. They do it all the time.
And they build libraries of this asset that they've collected along the way until the right moment pops up like that.
And somebody else might steal it, right? Somebody else might be able to use what they've stolen. So, within this sort of ecosystem of criminals, they might have, stolen a bunch of documents from some accounting firm, and they don't know how to make heads or tails with it. And then they put it up for sale, and then somebody else comes along and goes, I know exactly how to use that. I can take the client numbers out of that. I can set up a fake file sharing service where, we're transferring this information, which is a normal, process of doing business in that type of function. And, now I've got real stuff like right client names. I've got proper, account numbers or whatever it might be. It just makes the phishing lure they're creating far more legit, right? So, and at the surface again, if you're not really, really paying attention, or you don't conduct some other form of, secondary approval or validation, you're going to click on that, right? And you're going to fall for it. So, and that's why you hear all this time. They've been in your environment for months, right? And that might be it, that your data's been out there exposed to the criminals for a long time. And it's just, like I said, when the stars align, that's when they decide to strike.
That's why I think it's so important to have active participation, like what you're providing is this active understanding of what's going on in the network, so you can actually take action and actually capture some of these elements that come through and actually do something with it. I think that's something that people need to consider, and talking with Jeremy or Mark or people at Dally would be a great way to have that conversation and understand a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? That along the way, when these major events occur, when you go back in time and you kind of replay it, you recognize that there were lots of triggers, lots of indicators and clues that were there, right? So, it may have been heightened frequency of phishing lures that were coming through, right? That maybe looked like, I don't know, it was some kind of credit card offer for people with, high net wealth. And you see that, in the physical sense, it's the same as, why is that white van always parked across the street at 2 a.m.? Right? Our cameras keep picking it up. Now, they haven't done anything illegal in that sense, but, you start to wonder, right? You start to see people walking around outside your gates when you've closed them, or, they happen to be taking the alley between your building and your neighbors. And, you can take any one little item and say, okay, that's nothing. It's not enough significant evidence to say there's something criminal going on. But when you put them all together, you start to see a pattern, and you start to go, you know what? There is no such thing as coincidences, right? When you see too many of these, you're under attack, right? Somebody is figuring out what to do, and that's why constant vigilance is so important, because it may look like something minor, right? It's a new user gets created with administrative privileges, or somebody connects through the VPN, and they're logging in and they just kind of leave a connection there, and you sort of wonder why, right? Or they deploy a script, and again, it might look like it's nothing, but it's not, right? And and they do that, like I talked about persistence. That's something they like to do, right? Is they've made a copy of the key and they know how to get in your back entrance, and so they're maybe not breaking in tomorrow. They're waiting for the shipment of whatever to arrive, and that's when they're going to come in and rob you. So they just sit on it, right? And they wait. And like I said, heck, if they don't know how to use it, I guarantee you they can say, I have the keys to this, this store or this company. Anybody know what to do with it? And somebody else comes along and goes, heck yeah, I know how to fence that material. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to break in because I know I can sell it and I know what it's worth, right? And so they all kind of cooperate at all these different stages of it. And that's kind of what we see. Like, I'll jump to that slide here, is, you really do raise a good point, which is, don't assume a singularity, right? Like, just because you saw one phishing attempt, there's way more going on. And I'm not going to go into any of these elements in detail, but like I said, they're looking for these macro events. They're looking for the current, or the current to shift, or the tide to come in, and that's when they're going after you. And they've done a whole lot of work beforehand, stolen documents, stolen credentials, that they're putting all that stuff together to create that tailored campaign. And then that's when they start the game. And again, we won't go into these, but the point here is they're not coming through one window. They're coming through many. They're using different accounts that have been compromised. They're using your own security tools, or they're attempting to. They're using the tools that are built into the operating systems we know and love, right? So PowerShell or Microsoft RDP or whatever it might be, a third-party tool. And these things allow them to connect remotely. It makes them look like they're a legitimate administrative user, and they're off to the races, right? That's where they can deploy more tools to steal more credentials, or take to steal data, or collect keystrokes, or whatever it might be, or deploy something like ransomware, right? A more active, damaging form of malware. And so they're going at multiple stabs. They're trying to turn off your defenses, right? So they log into that first laptop and they go, oh, it's running CrowdStrike. Well, let me see if I can't roll CrowdStrike back to an older version that doesn't recognize my malware. And when that doesn't work, then they pivot and they move somewhere else. And so there is the corollary of, this is rattling the windows and, turning the doorknobs and seeing if anything's been left unlocked. And so, they'll try this for a while to get in. And that's why, 24/7 monitoring matters, because they don't have to do this all simultaneously, like 1, 2, and 3 there. They might have tried 1 and they go away for a while, and then they come back and they try 2. And if they have some success, they wait a while to let the dust settle, and then they go for 3.
Well, and I guess 20 years of experience with Centaur is, something that people need to consider. And the fact that you've seen almost every one of these scenarios, analyzed and pulled them apart and understood what they do and how they work and how to counteract them. And I think that's really what, partners with Dally and making sure that people understand and appreciate the fact that resources are available to protect themselves against this, just like a lock on a door, or a camera in an alley, or in a lobby. So I just want to make sure that people understand that there are resources available. And I think it's important for us to share that.
Yeah, and that's, and working with Dowley, what's really important here is that when I talk about the criminals understanding your business, you need partners that understand your business, right? That understand those risks, that know what your environment looks like, that knows what you're trying to protect, right? What matters to you, and okay, well, if this gets exposed, it's not the end of the world, right? But this stuff, this is critical. This is our lifeblood, and that's where having that kind of understanding and that intimate, professional relationship really matters, because we do, that helps us understand. And then collectively, we're both looking at all the assets and the services that we provide, right?
Yeah.
From one end of the spectrum to the other, because it's a combination of things, right? And we can't actually downplay the physical, because, of course, like I said, the cybersecurity bit, well, that gets all the headlines right now. But there are elements of physical, right? Breaking in, stealing keys, stealing passes, like ID cards and things like that, right? There's lots of tricks. Like, back in the day, we used to still do this when we do testing, right? And we talked about this, you get in the lobby and you tell the receptionist you have to use the facilities. And then when you go in there, if they don't escort you, you're off, you run around and you're taking photographs of, sensitive areas, like their boardrooms or offices to show files on a desk. And those elements are still very real, and they're still a real threat. Like some of the big cyber attacks we saw years ago that kind of kicked all this stuff off as far as like public awareness started with things like USB keys being dropped in parking lots, right? And people would pick them up and either wanted to keep them and use them, or they'd plug them in to see if there was something on there that might identify the owner. So, maybe it's good citizenry, but at the end of the day, that's all it took, right? So those, you can't underestimate the risk that comes from both the physical stuff and the remote virtual.
Well, and that's where I think they're coming together, where physical security and cybersecurity, it's they have to coincide in order to make sure that it's a comprehensive, available security system for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. This is it's the same as you lock your front door and you lock your back door, but you leave the skylights open. It doesn't matter then. Like, it doesn't matter that you locked your front door or your back door, because they're getting in off the roof, right? And it's the same thing. So if you lock down whatever, say you're in virtual environment, but on the physical side, it's sloppy and exposed, they're going to use that to get in. And now they're sitting on your own computers. Like, forget using remote administrative tools. I mean, it does happen. And yes, we point the finger, rightly so, at a lot of nations across the globe. But there's a lot of criminal activity and cybercrime that also goes on at home, right? That, they are local and they're not stupid. They know how to do this. So they steal the equipment. Like I said, they'll steal equipment, they'll steal files, things like that again, give them things like client names and account numbers and information about invoices, for example. So they can say, oh, I know they're buying X service from you and the service is worth this amount of money. Yeah. Or even the ones we've seen, which is highly disturbing, is stealing insurance information, because then they look at, policy data, because then they can look and they can say, oh, you're insured for, 200,000 in business disruption and 150 grand for this and so on. So when they attack you, they kind of already know how to negotiate, because they know what you've got. They know you have coverage, and literally as you're playing it back and forth, and we've seen this, they're saying, like, don't BS us, man. We know you have, 500,000 in insurance. So get your insured, we'll start at 750 as the demand, and you're going to say, I can't afford that. And then you're going to, eventually we'll negotiate down to 500, and, your insurer, and your insurer will feel they did a good job for you, and, it's covered, and, everybody kind of feels no harm, no foul, and they know what they're doing, right? That's why both aspects of this, and it's funny, right? Because I think with the cyber side, like I said, everyone focuses on that. And the real danger there is that, while you're kind of over here juggling or spinning that plate, you forget about the other one, which is the physical side.
Yeah. I want to ask Jeremy what some of the customers are saying, as they get updates on the service that eCentaur is providing in the conversations. And what is the pain points that they are looking to relieve and eliminate from their business?
Generally, it's around visibility, right? Being able to see multiple aspects of entry points and systems, things that if they have like a O365 environment, being able to inspect the logs and be able to see Hey, Jeremy, logged in today at noon from Houston, and then also again from Dallas at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Not physically possible, right?
Yeah.
So generally, it's all about visibility and where are the blind spots.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because when you look at all the security tools that are out there, that's why I popped to this slide, is there's lots of different pieces, right? There's logging, like you've talked about, and there's cloud-based services and network intrusion and defense systems and endpoint and so on, right? And insider threats. And all of these things are great, right? They are all good tools. In no way am I saying one's better than the other or turn off one in favor of the other. But they all kind of operate independently. And Jeremy, you're making a really important point here, which is you have to kind of put them all together to give you the full view. Otherwise, it's like, what you're seeing is these, it's silos. It's kind of like, spotlights, right? And in between the spotlights, you don't have 100% coverage. So there's dark, there's shadows, and that's where somebody can hide. And as I said earlier, when you see these different indicators over time and in different places, when you put them together, that's where you start to say this can't be coincidental. And so you're totally right. If you can't pull those things together, like look at those different log sources and things like behavioral analytics and the fact that, as you said, somebody is simultaneously or close to simultaneously logging in from 2 geolocations that they cannot have traveled between unless they have teleportation. Those are real indicators. And it happens all the time, right? Like we've had that where somebody logged in and we saw some suspicious activity, and the client was kind of like, well, it's probably legit. And then somebody says, oh, well, he's on vacation in the Bahamas. And we're like, well, the logins are coming from like New Jersey. So help me understand how that's happening, right? And it was at that moment where they kind of had the like, oh crap, right? Something is wrong here. And that's where we kind of, that's where we started taking further action. So it is critical to be able to see all this. And that's one of the areas too with security, is that as you expand, right? Like we're never turning technology off, right? You know what I mean? Like you've got your laptops and that's not going away. And we might be accessing data in the cloud. Well, now we have clouds to deal with as well, right? So not just the OS and whatever applications, but now we've got this other stuff, and it will continue to go on and on and on and on. It's just kind of the way it is. So it's important that we can see all of that, because when we talked about if you've got gaps, it's no good if you can protect your perimeter and your network, but you can't protect your laptops and your endpoints. And it's no good if they're all protected, but then you've got internet connected like IoT devices on whatever it is, a factory floor in a hospital somewhere else. And those aren't protected, because if they're connected, the sort of the false assumption is, yeah, well, when they come back into the piece that's protected, we'll spot it. And sometimes you don't, because like a lot of those defenses are designed with guns pointing outward, right? It's protect the fort. It's the assumption that the bad guy is out, in the field trying to get over the wall. And the reality is, if they look now like a legitimate insider because they've taken over some other unprotected device, it's like they're walking up in your uniform and you look at them and you go, okay, I'll let them in. I'll open the gate, because why not? And those systems, almost by design to some degree, are kind of blind to that. Because, like I said, they're looking outwards, right? They're looking for all those indicators of we call it indicators of compromise, right? The suspicious kind of activity that what does a bad guy look like I said, when they're trolling in your parking lot? And it doesn't necessarily recognize what they look like when they now have an ID badge that's legit and access, and they're now using your account. And that's the kind of thing that happens.
So I want to take it up a level, because we're talking about managed detection and response. And that covers several different areas of indicators, assessments, kind of some analysis somewhere. And for the CEO and for the person that may not be as technical as some of the people that are doing the work, what are some areas of interest that they need to be aware of that DALI is helping them understand and bringing to the table? Because I think that's a big word, that's a big term, this managed response, and it's just, you may not necessarily mean a lot to some of the people that aren't in the market and in media.
Yeah. So as I said, so managed detection and response, what we're at the essence we're talking about is 24/7, so around the clock. We have analysts, security experts that work in what we call a security operations center. And they're looking at all that data, right? They're looking at those logs, and they're looking at alerts and signals that come from, endpoint and cloud-based services and so on. And some of those things will automatically flag as suspicious, right? So concurrent logins, that kind of thing will flip up. Others won't. But when we see certain activity, we've got both a combination of both people and machine learning. I'm not going to over-rotate on the machine learning, but effectively we use it to wipe out a whole bunch of the false positives, right? Because if you think about an investigation, something suspicious pops up. You know what? Maybe it's a single step check, and you go, okay, well, let me validate this. Is it A or B? Well, it turns out it's okay. So you know what? That's a false flag. We can just switch that one off and reset that alert. If that doesn't occur and we go, yeah, you know what, that still might be suspicious. Now you kind of go to the next step in the investigation along the path. So some of that's automated, but then all of that gets kicked over to analysts. And, humans have guts, right? They have intuition, and they do a good job of starting to go, all right, so I've been told A, B, and C is a bad thing. Well, I just saw A, B, and J. And 2 out of 3, I gotta dig into this one, and I gotta figure that out. So they're doing that, and they're looking at those logs, and they know what to do, right? And they know how to do this very rapidly. So when they see something, they can go, great, now I'm gonna go flip over to this person's endpoint, and now I'm gonna pull information from that to tell me, have files been modified? Is that laptop talking to places it doesn't normally talk to, IP addresses or destinations it doesn't normally talk to? Is it working at a weird time of night? Like, I know we're in whatever time, central time zone or Eastern. And, this person theoretically is, making large file transfers at 4 a.m. their time. That's not normal, right? And of course, that's how the Target data breach with the major retailer was affected through their HVAC system. And, it was using the automated controls to actually pull out data. And there was lots of indicators, right? Like, big, huge files going out in the middle of the night. And, normally an air conditioner is not doing that, right? So you can baseline that. So they're experienced in dealing with that. And then they know what to do. Like, they can test, and, a way to, it's a bit like pulling fuses, right? If something's wrong, they can sit and they can contain that device. So they can quarantine that endpoint and knock that laptop off the network and see if it goes away. And if it doesn't, then there's something else going on, and they might then be able to backtrack. And, so if we talk about remote administrative connections, so that laptop was connected and did something funny at a weird time of day. Well, now I'm going to go back and see what did it do. Oh, well, like that's, look at that. It created 3 more user accounts in a short period of time, promoted 2 of their credentials to have administrative rights, and they're now accessing some other device in the network or your environment that person wouldn't talk about. It's a finance person. Well, why are they trying to establish a connection with the web server, right? They don't do that work. And it's that's what they're really, really good at, being able to detect those anomalies, like you said, the odd behaviors. And then that's where they'll start taking those steps, right? They isolate those devices. They can block traffic. They can cut off the destination it's going to, right? So effectively that can't communicate anymore. And that'll tell if it's good or bad, because if it's good, someone will pick up the phone and call IT because something's not working. And if it's bad, they'll pivot and they'll move to somewhere else, right? They'll move to a new destination, or they'll try to come in through another source. And we're tracking all of that. We log all that. So it's not like that gets forgotten, right? We now recognize that we see something, as I said, suspicious going on. So we heighten our vigilance in those situations.
And that's when the good guys build their own library of tactics that the bad guys are using, right?
Yeah. And that's it, right? Yeah. We have that. That's part of some of the automated systems, and some of what happens that's sort of fed to our SOC analysts is you know what? If you see several accounts being created in a very short period of time, and then they attempt to do this, that's probably bad, right? Yeah. So dive in and and validate that, or verify, is it benign or is it malicious?
Well, I didn't necessarily mean to derail the presentation. However, I did want to bring up a couple of points that I think are absolutely critical for organizations to actually reach out and have conversations with Jeremy and Dally and make sure that they have an awareness. And that's what we're doing here. We want to be able to build this awareness into the community and add value. so people understand what they're up against and what is actually taking place day to day, every single hour of the day, 24/7, right? So
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? We talked about this. The bad guys are well armed and they're sophisticated. You have to be too, right? And it's bringing that sophistication at scale, bringing that ability, and doing it constantly. I mean, that's the other thing with this is that we deal with the security side of it, so you don't, right? You can go back to doing whatever your business is. If you're a doctor or an engineer in a factory or a lawyer or whatever you might be,
yeah,
focus on what you're really good at, man. Go make your money. Our job, right, is to make sure that nobody steals the money that that's hard earned. And we're doing that constantly every day. And you see the numbers I threw up there. We do this within seconds, we contain within minutes, and it's constant, right? Like we can do this at scale. So it gives you an idea of the volume, which then also helps you think like, if I turn this around, if you're in a certain business, can you do this? If you found something, let's say you're lucky enough to detect it, do you know how to respond? And can you do it in 20 minutes? Because within 20 minutes, they've stolen the data and they're gone. You know what I mean? Like the damage is potentially done in that kind of short time frame.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, Mark, maybe you've got some history with some clients that, customers or people in your networks that are thinking about this or talking to this at the C level. And obviously, this is becoming a point of concern for, and Dally brought eCentire into the equation because of their depth of experience, like you started out with. Are there any other concerns that you've had conversations around that, people are thinking about or taking ownership of or taking action?
Well, there's no question this is top of mind to every company executive out there, primarily CIOs, CEOs. It's no question. And Mark, you brought up a great point about, the history of the events that you've seen, right? And that, without question, is one of the strong points of eCentire. I mean, in 20 years, they've seen a lot, right? And actually, if you go back, we have actually had a couple of clients hit with ransomware. And trust me, by the time it was all over, the ones that didn't pay the ransom wish they had. With what it cost them to rebuild their networks, the information that was lost. And in two specific cases I can remember, very simple access via an employee clicking on a link in an email, both cases. And one, which happened to be a school district, which happened to be on a holiday, which made it even worse for the environment. But, made a ransomware demand that they refused to pay. And the end result was their entire network was destroyed. Every bit of history, every email. And it happened to be right in the middle of student registration. So they lost all that data. And needless to say, it's kind of like on the physical security side, when people call us after there's an incident, right? After they've been broken into or after their equipment's been stolen. Same thing with these two. While it was top of mind before, it became very, very important that it never happen again. And so, it's just a shame. Everything about this world that gets worse is better unfortunately, for our business, no question.
Yeah, the executive concern, I should say, is top of mind now. This is a boardroom level issue. In fact, we deal a lot with that with clients. So providing things like reporting, having the conversations with them, right? Like in many cases, I will do this and others will, where we're in with their C-suite or their board and we're explaining what the risks look like that are specific to their business, what we've seen within their environments, the kind of stuff we're stopping, and then making the kind of recommendations, right? The forward-looking stuff, because you were right. It is amazing how many people want to wind back the clock somehow, and Control Z that when it happens. And you can't, and it's certainly, if you think about, the dollar signs, they're low when it all begins and beforehand, and the further down the this security event or data breach timeline you go, the price just keeps going up, and there is no free, right? So you're right. You pay the ransom and maybe you get your files back and you get your business back. You don't pay the ransom and you're rebuilding, and that's all going to come down to your backups. What can you restore, or how much damage have they done? How much business do you lose as a result? Like that academic institution, I know that can be incredibly damaging from a reputation perspective. There's also regulatory issues with that, as there are in other businesses like finance and healthcare, for example, where now you may have, on top of the pain of the event, you've now got, regulatory fines that you may have to deal with. And that's the case. And that's why executives do look at it now. And, part of that is helping them understand what their risk looks like, what their obligations look like. And then, making sure we can all have a conversation where the technical and the non-technical, we can talk to each other in a common language. And we know, like they're saying, here's our top priorities. And the technical team knows the priorities and knows where to invest and, where to prioritize to make sure they protect them, so that we're all aligned. Otherwise, you get a lot of blind trust, and execs think that they're covered and protected, and they're not, right? And meanwhile, the technical people knew all along that they weren't, and probably have been trying to tell them that for years.
I'll just give one more point of just how far this has gone. And Jeremy could relate to this, but even in environments where, a lot of what we do now touches the network, right? As more physical security migrates to IP. Well, as part of our certificates of insurance now, we're seeing more customers demand us carry cybersecurity insurance.
Yes, absolutely.
And which a year ago, 2 years ago, probably never would have come up.
No.
And,
no.
It does now.
No, and that's a good point, right?
Guys that leave their network open, we're liable.
Yeah, insurance, security, minimum standards that you put in place. It's not just you, right? It's your clients that can be affected. You are part of a larger supply chain potentially, right? So, you're a vendor to other people and so on. And, whoever's at the top of that food chain ultimately is going to be the one who's responsible and accountable for it, because it's their brand is the one that suffers, the damage. So, they are getting smarter about asking, the people downstream, the companies downstream, how well protected are they, and where do they invest, and do they have coverage, and if something went wrong, who's paying for what, and how do we work together, and all that. And those are all business decisions that, like I said, my sort of sum of that is cybersecurity is not an IT problem to solve. It's a business risk to manage.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Mark, are there any questions that you discovered that are not being asked that we could address here for the C-level suite and the boardroom that, people may not necessarily know enough to ask the questions? What kind of questions do we need to bring out to the table and make sure that people are aware of?
Yeah, I think, there's kind of 5 real quick steps here. The first one is really an awareness of the risks, right? So can you ask those questions? Like, so, if a criminal or a bad guy was to target us, who would be targeting us? And what would they be attempting to steal, right? The 5 Ws, how would they do it, and so on. And, making sure that the technical team understands that. Understanding the risk and the obligations you have. So what assets? I mean, that's at the end of the day, assets are data. That's the new currency. That's what they're attempting to steal, because they can monetize that in some way down the line. So, what do we have? And, what's the most valuable stuff? And if they stole it, are there obligations with this, right? Will we have to tell our clients, or, do I have to report that to a regulator? Those sorts of things. And then, and based on that, it's how would you, ask them the questions like, how would you detect this? If someone attempted to enter our, whatever it is in your business, our vault, how quickly would you know or recognize that event is going on? And more importantly, how can you stop them? Like, what steps would you take to stop them and get them to kind of walk through it? Like, and it can't be, the answers you're looking for here are kind of complicated. You don't want a simple, we have a logging system that'll stop it, or, that'll detect it, or we have, endpoint, so that'll catch this, because nothing is, there is no perfect system. and
No.
nothing, not one tool catches everything, like we've talked about again and again. It's a combination of all these detectors and ability to investigate. So, you're looking for somebody to say that. In fact, I'd want somebody who says, here's the deal. You told me that X, Y, and Z were the most important things in this organization. So I have taken 80% of our budget, and that's what I focused on. And I know that we might get hit. So I've taken the other 20% and I put that into ways that we would respond if we needed this. So we train, we know who to call, we know what to do, because any CISO gets up and says, we're never going to get hacked. That's the one you should fire, right? The ones who say, I'm going to do the best with the results I have, and here's the risk that's left over. Those are the ones you promote. They're the ones who, they do know what they're doing, and they've got a realistic view of it, and realistic, I think, perspective on what the likelihood of an event occurring, and they're prepared, and that's the right answer.
Well, and I really encourage people to reach out to, Dally and have the conversation, at least get educated and understand what the risks and the rewards are, because there are multiple layers, there are multiple ways of penetration, whether it's a locked door or a key fob or a file getting open. There's lots of different things that businesses could take steps, and they don't have to be monumental steps. I think awareness and educating their employees and their teams of the risks and the advantages of being consistently aware of what is possible, and making sure that they connect and collaborate with a partner like Dally. I think it's really important for people to understand that's an opportunity. There's a lot of information that you've shared today, and a lot of I look forward to future conversations like this, because I think it's absolutely necessary nowadays, and it's important for us to share this information.
Yeah, talk about it like risk, right? What's the threat? What's the likelihood it's going to happen? Mm-hmm. What would the outcome be? What's that going to cost us if it were to occur, right? If you had a major ransomware outage like you were talking about, Mark. Yes. And what's it going to take to prevent that, right? It's not, that approach is not complicated, right? It's, yes, there's a lot of details we have to work out. But the top level discussion, and just like you said, it's the awareness and the recognition that there is a risk. And now we can all have a meaningful conversation, because we're not arguing that the sky is blue or what color is the sky, and we're trying to get to a baseline on that before we can then discuss clouds. Like, we all agree there's this risk. So now it's like, we don't want to overspend, and we want to make sure but we also want to make sure that we're protecting that and preventing it from happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, believe it or not, it's the same way on the security side. You can't tell them it's never going to happen, but you can do what you can do to mitigate the risk, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. Mitigate the risk and prepare for what you can, right? That's what we always say, is prevent what you can, and be ready to respond to what you can't.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here, Jeremy, do you have any other last comments or questions or recommendations to people that might be watching this in the future?
Just one of the common things that I've heard over 20-ish years in the IT industry is, hey, for our regulatory responsibilities, all of our boxes are checked, and being compliant doesn't make you secure. And like Mark said, you need to prepare for, how are we going to react to the things that we can't, adequately prepare for.
Yeah. Mr. Davis, any last comments or?
No, I thought today was great. I mean, I love what Centaur does. I learn something new every time I spend a little time with the guys, and we're just proud to be partnered with you guys and appreciate all that you do.
Yeah, as are we. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So, Mark, I know that we didn't necessarily cover every slide that you had to share. Is there anything that you need to leave us with, or make sure that we're thinking about before we finish up the week?
Yeah, we really covered the high notes here, right? I don't think we actually, at the end of the day, missed anything of any significance. I think what people have to recognize is that you are a target, right? Someone is trying to steal something from you, regardless of the nature of your business, regardless of where you're based. there is something they can turn into money. And so that's why it's worth not worth, it's why it's critical that you have the conversation with Dowley, that you reach out and you talk to them, because, one day one of those criminals is going to unfortunately come knocking, right? So, don't sort of, ignorance is not bliss in this case, right? It down the road might be negligence. So you really do have to be prepared.
Totally agree. Well, I really appreciate the fact that we were able to put this together, and thank you for everybody's flexibility and attendance and the time and effort that it goes into it, because this kind of information, is absolutely critical in this day and age. And I know and understand that there are people out there that have not yet been informed of the nature of ransomware, hacking, and all of the things that are knocking on the door. So thank you so much for being here, Mark. It's always a pleasure to work with you at Dowley, and Jeremy, I look forward to future conversations. And Mark, let's make sure that we come back and continue this conversation in a future episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep talking.
Hey, Russ, thanks for the platform. Appreciate it.
And thank you so much for everybody joining in and being here. And as we all know that, we have an opportunity to actually be out there and share this information. So thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to the next episode. So
thanks, take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Jeremy, take care.
Thank you. Great job, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Enjoy the day.
And you.